Greetings, GameCola faithful, and welcome to the GameCola Podcast. This is podcast number... Wait, why am I the one doing the intro? Where is everybody? Hello? Well, since it seems like there's nobody else here on this lovely day of April 1st, I guess it's up to me to talk about video games for as long as everyone can hopefully stand it. So, to drop the charade, my name is James Pelster, and I am a staff member of GameCola.net and the co-administrator of its YouTube channel. And I am here today because Joseph Martin, the usual podcast commander, is rather busy right about now, and so we thought it might be funny to bring back our periodic April Fool's podcast, where a GameCola staff member, usually the podcast commander, takes over to talk solo for a while. I am not the podcast commander, but my name does start with a J, so that's close enough. I have some notes here I've written about various ideas I have to talk about, which I don't normally do for podcasts where there's other people who can keep me on track. So, in lieu of that, feel free to grab yourself a beverage and snack of your choice where applicable, and settle in for a nice long ride as I try taking the reins for a bit, and I hope that you can stand my enthusiastic ramblings. Oh, and since Joe always likes to start the podcast with a rhyme about the podcast number, this is podcast number JT3, and it's just gonna be me. So, where to begin? Probably best with some GameCola related things, specifically because I run the YouTube channel. Some stuff about that. If you're watching this close to the release of this podcast, or heck, maybe even in the future, you might have been wondering, where the heck did Danganronpa V3 and the Great Ace Attorney Let's Plays go? We have kind of all run into a lot of difficulties with burnout and editing-related troubles. In particular, I edit Danganronpa V3, and John Rizzi edits for the Great Ace Attorney, and the both of us have just been really going through a lot of trouble finding the motivation and time to actually edit all of these videos, especially because with series like Danganronpa and Ace Attorney, because they are sort of visual novel style games, there's a lot of dialogue. And while we love recording them and we love reading along, it also means that all of those recording sessions are very long, and that in order for any individual episode to make significant progress, you need it to be very long, like an hour plus long. And as a result, that's a lot of work to edit, especially on even a semi-tight time frame like 1 to 2 weeks. And heck, even on a monthly scale, clearly John and I still couldn't keep that up, just largely because, in particular, John actually edits videos for a living, and so doing that as a hobby as well is not a lot of fun. And in my case, while I certainly love the finished product as well as what goes into it, the actual process of editing is way too time consuming for videos of this length to really feel enjoyable. So yeah, we have had a lot of troubles getting that out. It has been 4 months at least since our last video upload that was not some kind of a podcast or a special event. And it has been over a year since we've last actually recorded any sort of video at all. They've just been kind of sitting on our hard drives collecting virtual dust. So, yeah, we're working on it, but it is very slow going just due to severe burnout. And in the case of Danganronpa as well, just burnout, even with the games themselves. We've kind of had some time to decompress, and I was talking with John. We really haven't made much progress, and the last couple recording sessions we had, the last one in particular, I could tell, even when we finished recording, I could tell straight away that our energy was very low. We were definitely kind of tired and just not the energy and the emotion was not there for that recording session, and I have been really reluctant to edit it and put it out there just for fear that it's not going to be up to the quality that we've had for previous episodes. But there's not really a whole lot I can do to work around that because I mean, we can't really re-record that episode even if I could roll back to a previous save file. Our reactions to anything going on wouldn't be genuine. And so it's just kind of a tough position that we're in. So my thoughts are that just as going forward, whenever I get the time, I'm just going to try and put together these last couple episodes that we've recorded. And as for future episodes, I can't speak regarding Great Ace Attorney yet because we still need to kind of talk with Anna as well to figure out what the three of us collectively want to do. But John and I, for Danganronpa, we think we've decided that moving forward, we are probably going to try live streaming rather than recording and then subsequently editing and uploading our sessions. In particular, it will just allow us to completely eliminate the sort of middleman task of editing from both of our plates. Whoever would want to take care of that. The only downside I can really see is that in some way, I guess that feels like it would be diminishing the quality and the accessibility of those videos because, while they weren't very super heavily condensed or edited, I would occasionally slip in a joke here and there. And if we're going to make this work, we would probably just want to leave the VODs as they are unedited. So it would mean no more of that, which is a little bit of a shame. But if it means that we can at least try to be more consistent, or that we're not going to view every new recording as, oh, great, another 3+ hour long video I need to edit and put together, then that's really the major goal that we want to accomplish. So I don't know. What do you all GameCola faithful think about that? If you are in our Discord server, please feel free to kind of weigh in on that if you would like. Or you can leave some comments in the YouTube comment section or on our actual internet website. Because I wouldn't mind some feedback on that sort of idea, because we know that it's kind of been the major point of content aside from the podcast that GameCola has really been producing, and we've just kind of fallen off the face of the earth as far as that goes. And we feel bad about it. We really do. We've just kind of been really hemming and hawing because we're not sure how to proceed forward, but we think we have a potential solution. And obviously, while all of us are still very busy with school and work and other stuff, it would at least help cut down the amount of work and therefore make it easier for us to continue producing content for you all. So that's my thoughts on that. As far as after Danganronpa or Great Ace Attorney, what might be coming next? That is a tough call. I'm definitely looking to maybe try and record some sort of series that would be able to have shorter episodes, hopefully, again, because if I want to actually do the editing and splitting these up and uploading these on even a remotely regular schedule, I would probably want to play some kind of a game that I can more easily break down into small, short little, maybe even sub 30-minute episodes, maybe 20, 25 minutes. Just something I can break down into sort of bite-sized, digestible videos where you can make some kind of meaningful progress every video, just to cut down on the amount of work. So I've been thinking about maybe playing some of the original Resident Evil games, because I have the means to record all of those. Those are games I'm familiar with. I enjoy playing them and replaying them. So that could be fun. Once the Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection comes out later this month, I might try and check out some of that, because those are games that I've always wanted to play. I've thought that they're really cool, and they might be good for sort of bite-sized content that could be done on a regular or semi-regular basis. I'll get more into discussing the games themselves a little bit later when I talk about video games on this video game podcast. But for now, this is the meta, the GameCola related GameCola podcast section. So yeah, There is also the sequel to Valhalla, which is Nirvana. That's going to be coming out eventually, we hope. I know Anna Bernarski and I had a ton of fun recording that a couple years ago, but we don't really have a definitive date for when that is going to be progressing because, from what I understand, the lead developer and writer is been super burnt out lately. And so while progress is being made, it is very slow. And so there is no definitive answer there. But hey, given how long Danganronpa and Great Ace Attorney are taking, maybe by the time we actually finish those series, it will finally be out. Who knows? I think that is all of the GameCola related stuff. So let's move on to video game related things. And I think I'm going to start out with more modern or contemporary video games that I've been playing or know about, and then move on to some older or classic related games. I've talked about the Xenoblade games at sort of length on one or two podcasts in the past, but I am now writing a formal review, a written review on our actual internet website for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It may or may not be published by the time that you listen to this, but it's gonna be pretty awesome, I think. It's going to be insanely long. My word count is currently something like 6,700 words, and I'm still not quite done yet. It is probably going to be, quote-unquote, my magnum opus for GameCola article writing. Admittedly, that's not a very high bar to clear, because it will also be only my second article ever written for the site, but I suspect that it may not be topped for quite some time. I am really proud of it so far, and I hope that you all enjoy it. I was actually spurred on to do it because I had originally written just this big, long list of things I wanted to talk about in this podcast here, because since I was by myself, I could talk about spoilers and everything in more detail without worrying about spoiling any other GameCola staff members who were on the podcast with me. So I had a big, giant list of topics and spoilers and such that I wanted to talk about on this podcast, but I decided that, you know what? It would have made this whole recording even more absurdly long than it probably is already going to be for a one-man show. So I figured that also being able to show off various screenshots, because the game is absolutely gorgeous, and compose my thoughts better, rather than sort of a one-shot stream of consciousness kind of thing, would have its merits. And besides that, I think GameCola.net is due for another big, prominent article to show off, and I've really enjoyed making it. But boy howdy, has it been a lot of work. It has been in the works for about a solid month now. So yeah, it's crazy. So check it out if it is published by the time that you listen to this, and if not, look forward to it. So moving on from Xenoblade, another modern game I've been playing, which just came out in late February, is Kerbal Space Program 2. And the sequel, as you might imagine, to Kerbal Space Program, a game which I have something like 160 to 170 hours in, if not more. It's a sort of gamified space flight simulator. You get to build rockets and planes and little probes and launch them and send them to various planets, establish comm networks, land on various celestial bodies, create space stations, and do basically anything that your creative heart desires with relation to just building and flying rockets and spaceships and all that sort of stuff. It has a massive, giant modding community as well, who make all sorts of crazy creations and stuff that extend the capabilities of the base game. It's absolutely amazing, and I have been a huge fan of it for a number of years now, especially with my renewed interest in space and space flight and rocketry, etc. in the last couple of years. It's a lot of fun. So Kerbal Space Program 2, however, released in early access on February 24th, And boy, it is really, really broken. It is very, very buggy. It is early access, like early access. Just some basic features are not yet implemented. The game is really unstable. Even looking back at Kerbal Space Program 1, it's not even close to feature parity with that game, its predecessor. So yeah, it's got a long ways to go. But for what it's worth, I know that a lot of people were really upset and kind of bothered by how buggy and everything the game was. But yeah, they did at least give us about a week and a half of advance notice. They actually had a bunch of the prominent Kerbal Space Program YouTubers and content creators fly over to Europe to preview the game in its state just before the launch. And they gave them full permission to, hey, here, you can record this stuff. We have machines and rigs set up to help you record and just kind of get the word out. Hey, show people what the game is like so that they have an accurate idea of what the game is going to run like, what it's going to look like, and how it's going to play like before it opens up into early access. And this game did not offer pre-orders at all. It was only available to buy once early access opened. The game has been through development hell, especially through COVID and a lot of the its publisher and other stuff kind of going through a tumultuous couple years. But it is here now, and it's cool. It's buggy, but it's really cool. The main thing that bothers me personally is the price, because it is, again, Kerbal Space Program 1 costs $40 on Steam. And Kerbal Space Program 2 in early access, which is not even close to the state of completeness and the amount of features that its predecessor has, is $10 more expensive. It's $50. And that price may even go up after it exits early access. So once it exits early access, it will have so many more features, and it'll be so much of a better game than in what came before it. But yeah, that is a lot of money to be dropping on a game that is so incomplete and unfinished. So I can definitely understand why a lot of people are bummed out about that. But I have been enjoying it when I can, because again, lots of bugs, like very game-breaking ones in some cases, like the inability to save or trying to load a save file just refusing to work and putting you in a completely different location than where you picked up. Crafts clipping through the ground on certain spots on planets. Kerbals not being able to return to their spacecraft after exiting and walking around. The rockets being super, super wobbly, like, limp noodles just wobbling around during flight. And things like RCS, reaction control system thrusters, which help kind of control and orient your spacecraft's direction and movement in space in fine tuning, just not working very well at all. And more than that, one of the biggest problems is that the game runs very, very poorly. The performance is very bad. It requires super beefy hardware to run it, and even then, it does not run super well depending on the situation and how complex the craft that you're building is. So, yeah, people are kind of miffed. They're bummed out. I think a lot of the really dedicated fan base has kind of accepted it, and they went ahead and bought it knowing what they were getting into and just having faith that the developers would improve the game. And I also have a lot of faith based on what I've seen in just this initial build. And the first update patch, it was a huge patch. Something like 280 plus bugs were fixed, and a lot of them being some of those super critical show-stopping bugs that I talked about earlier. Huge improvements. And it also removed just some of the kind of general jank with the game, or at least the more obvious instances of it. And the game even performs noticeably better. It depends on the system that you have and what kind of rockets you were building, or planes, etc. But some people have reported anywhere from about a 50% performance improvement to a 200 to 400% improvement in some situations. So some gains small, some gains very large, but any gains being very, very welcome when sometimes people had the frame rates in the single digits. So anyway, it renews my hope that the team working on this is really listening to community feedback. They've been doing their best to be transparent with everything that's been going on, and I have faith that in a couple months' time, and even in a year's time, that this game could be something really, really special. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and for what it is, I am still enjoying the buggy mess that we have right now. One other thing I wanted to mention about that: some people I've seen have been a little bit worried about the state of people making mods with this game, because the publisher is a subsidiary of Take-Two Interactive, and Take-Two Interactive, as you might know, does not always have the best reputation for dealing with its modding scenes, especially with things like Grand Theft Auto 5. I'm not super worried about that, to be honest, because the developers of the game in official press material have talked about mods being a feature or something that you can do. And I feel like their publisher would not have allowed them to market that as a feature if they were not going to allow it. And of course, with Grand Theft Auto 5 mods, the big elephant in the room, that is a game that has a large multiplayer component, Grand Theft Auto Online. But, it has a massive revenue stream to protect in that case, because people could be cheating, they could be hacking, or they could be, just messing with other players' enjoyment. Whereas with Kerbal Space Program, any mods that you have are going to be largely cooperative in nature. You can't really, hack or cheat too much in that kind of a game. Even when multiplayer is eventually implemented, which is going to be a lot later down the road in the development roadmap. Anyway, I digress. So, moving on to the next game I have in my little notes here, and that is Forza Horizon 4 and 5. These are sort of half simulator, half arcade style racing games. They're made by Xbox Game Studios, and I have just been having a load of fun with these two games. I had never really enjoyed racing games prior to that point. I had played a couple racing games like Need for Speed on my PlayStation 2 back when I was a kid. Never really got into that, and just never really understood where what the fun was in all of those games. Didn't feel like they were for me. But a couple months ago, one of my friends convinced me to try out Forza Horizon 5, which was on sale on Steam at the time. And so I checked it out, and I've been pretty hooked on it. I think I've got something like 60 hours clocked in it now, and then another 20 hours clocked in the previous game, Forza Horizon 4, which I ended up buying after loving 5 so much. So I think one of the reasons I enjoy these games is because they don't really take themselves too seriously. They just show off a lot of passion for cars and car culture, and as well as the region that each game takes place in. One of the things with each of these Forza Horizon games is that they take place in a different sort of region based off of a real geographical area. So, for example, 5 takes place in Mexico. It's not a real place in Mexico, but sort of a conglomeration, a fictional, condensed version of Mexico. They still call it Mexico, but it's not any one particular place, just sort of a combination of the different geographical kinds of landscapes that Mexico has. You have a big tropical forest. You've got dusty dunes. You've got sort of wasteland, shrubland, sort of lava rocky areas, and even a giant mountain and dormant volcano caldera. And beaches and a bunch of other places. A little small, colorfully painted town, very densely packed streets. It's all so very, very lovingly crafted. 4 takes place in the United Kingdom. And I'm not quite as familiar with that game's map, but it's got a lot of big rolling hills, long sweeping valleys, again, densely packed cities, and little coastline roads, lots of dirt tracks through forested areas. And, oh my goodness, they are gorgeous, gorgeous games. I'm not super into hyper-realistic visuals, but these games look absolutely phenomenal. And back to the subject of the sort of celebration of car culture, etc., one of the things that these games also tend to do that I really like is they focus on sort of car culture in that particular region that they're taking place in. So, for example, with Forza Horizon 5, since it takes place in Mexico, they discuss about the Volkswagen Beetle, a car that is very central to the culture in that area and has been sort of a staple that you see for decades and decades and decades. And they have an entire little sort of small sub-story related just to the Volkswagen Beetle and its legacy in Mexico. And I just think that all of these things are really, really cool. It's so much fun to play. In addition to the races, which are broken up into 4 categories, that's just road races, street races, which are like road races, except they're sort of supposed to be done illicitly under the radar, and so there's just other cars driving out on the road that you have to watch out for because the road hasn't been formally closed off for the race. There's also dirt races, which are kind of rally style, and then there's cross-country races, which is quite literally just going across the landscape. You're not following any sort of predetermined roads a lot of the time, just going across hills and valleys and through rivers and driving across people's, farmland, which is quite hilarious. But there's also sort of little mini events like speed traps where you have to try and reach a specific target speed to earn points. There's drift zones where you try and do as many drifts without spinning out as possible, again, to rack up points. There are sort of trailblazers, which is just, hey, here's your starting point, here's your ending point. Get there as fast as possible. We don't care what your route is. And again, on the clock for points. And then things called danger signs, which is just basically, hey, here's a giant ramp going off of a cliff of some kind. See how far you can fly off of the cliff before landing back down and, land on your wheels instead of, on your hood or roof. There's a ton of different things you can do. There's also car customization and upgrading, so you can kind of re-kit out your car with various upgrades, etc. You can be really granular with it. You can even tweak individual systems like your suspension, your tire pressure, your gear ratios, your differential settings, your anti-roll bars, amongst many other things if you really want to get down into the nitty-gritty, and all of it is to some degree simulated, and I find that absolutely fascinating. I don't understand most of it at all, but they do try to give you sort of general breakdowns of each individual system, what changing each sort of dial on the settings does, and why you might or might not want to do it. It's still all way over my head. I'm not a huge car guy, but it's just an amazing amount of customization. And then, of course, you can also change the paint jobs of your car, and you can even, using third-party tools, basically import like actual graphics and logos and turn them into decals to put on your car. And there's just such an amazing creative scene behind each of these different aspects. And you can upload and share your own creations or your own tuning setups or your own upgrade kits for other people to download and try out. And it's all so amazing, and just there's such an amazing, loving community behind these games, and you can just really, really feel how much fun it is when you check all this stuff out. Anyway, I've been going on about this for a very, very long time, but some last things to touch on there is the expansion passes. The DLC for these games are hilarious. Forza Horizon 4 had a giant Lego DLC pack where you could drive cars made out of Lego, drive around in a Lego world, just crash into things and just have them shatter. I think you can pick up like studs and other stuff along the road. I could be wrong about that, but all while discussing the history of Lego, which is really, really cool. They actually give you kind of a breakdown of Lego. And then in Forza Horizon 5, there is a giant Hot Wheels, like a life-sized Hot Wheels amusement park track, which takes place in the sky for some reason. It's really, really strange, but it's so amazing. You've got like giant active volcanoes you're racing through, a giant tropical jungle, an icy tundra with mountains and slick roads, and just giant, loop-de-loops with a big orange plastic track spiraling all around. And it's so much fun. If that sounds amazing, it's even more amazing than it is. You even get special skills while driving on that track for doing things like loop-de-loops and pulling insane G-forces from like the sideways angled tracks and all sorts of other stuff. And of course, the big sub-story there is talking about the history of Hot Wheels, how they started, how the sort of scene began, and how people began customizing their cars, etc. Just so much fun. And, of course, you can then unlock actual Hot Wheels cars, like custom Hot Wheels cars, to drive around, not only in that track, but also in the main game. And it's absolutely amazing. There is a new expansion coming out for Forza Horizon 5 soon, which is the Rally Adventure, and I am also super excited for that, because rally driving, the dirt racing, is by far my favorite kind of race in both of these games. Just by far and away, I find that I have the best sort of driving sense and intuition for rally, which is kind of weird to me because I've never raced ever. I don't even drive that fast or anything, so I'm not sure how that is, but I just have a lot of fun kitting out, semi-old 70s or 80s cars and equipping them for rally, and then just blasting through a nice dirt and road track. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, that is all I have to say about that, but I'm sure I could come up with more if you just left me here for another hour and a half. Next up, just a short one here, Fire Emblem Engage. I have only played a little bit of this one. I think I'm up to only chapter 4 or 5, and already I feel like I'm getting kind of overwhelmed with enemies. Yeah, it's classic Fire Emblem. I really enjoyed Fire Emblem Three Houses when it came out a couple years ago. That was the first Fire Emblem game, and the only Fire Emblem game I've really played, to be perfectly honest. I did actually go ahead and buy a bunch of the 3DS games, like Awakening, Echoes, and Birthright. Or whatever that other one was called. Fire Emblem Awakening, Echoes, and there's one other game that was like kind of a double release, kind of like how Pokemon does it. I can't remember it. But I've never really been any good at them. Three Houses was really the only one I felt like I could get good at. I just generally suck at strategy and tactics games, so having it kind of feel overwhelming this early on is not super great, but also, maybe I should have set the difficulty to easy or something like that, because while Three Houses kind of diverged in some ways from the classic series gameplay, this one, from what I understand and what my friends who are more into the series have told me, this is much more classic Fire Emblem gameplay, traditional Fire Emblem gameplay. And from what they've told me, that it feels perfect. They're really, really fans of the gameplay. They feel like it's as smooth and as fun and as intuitive as the series has ever felt to them. My friend in particular loved this game, and as he was playing it, just constantly kept messaging me about how the game just felt like it was getting better with every single battle, and how he could not believe it. So I hope to get back to it at some point. Don't know when that will be, but I trust his opinion on that. And while it may not necessarily be a game for me, I would definitely encourage you all, if you are interested in that, to check it out. And that friend, by the way, is now going on and replaying a bunch of the original classic retro Fire Emblem games in order, which has apparently been a heck of a thing, because some of those games, rather than having a ton of short and sweet battles, some of the games apparently just have like a dozen incredibly long, like 40 to 50 plus turn battles, and it's just a massive slog. So yeah, beware if you ever get the inkling to try and do that. I don't know if I can personally recommend it. So that's all for Fire Emblem. Another game that I have been playing somewhat recently is Subnautica and Subnautica Below Zero. Again, I don't have a ton to say about these, but the major things are just amazingly immersive, gorgeous, gorgeous visuals, fantastic soundtrack, very, very atmospheric, just super, super unnerving and scary, especially at nights or if you're delving particularly deep. This is the kind of game I feel like could certainly bring out phobias in you that you did not know you had until now. In sort of a good way, I guess, in the sense that, oh man, it feels really realistic. It feels, well, I guess not realistic, that's not the right word, but it feels very real. It feels like you're very immersed in that world. And so just being at the top of the water, looking down below you and not being able to see the bottom, and then even swimming down and down and down, and the water is all just getting darker and darker around you, and you still can't see anything, and you hear all these strange noises around you, and you have no idea where you are, and you've got to make sure that you have enough oxygen left, and it's, oh my god, it's an amazing experience. Fun crafting system. The original game, because actually there's been some confusion about this in the GameCola Discord. Subnautica and Subnautica Below Zero are two completely different games. Below Zero is not an expansion pack or DLC for Subnautica. It is its own separate game. I think it's a sequel. I haven't played as much of it, but I've gotten a reasonable ways in, and I think it's sort of a sequel or something like that. Maybe a prequel. Heck, I'm not sure. So the original game, Subnautica, just recently got a huge update patch, which has been in the works for almost a year, I think, which has been the developers working to backport a lot of the improvements to the game engine that they've been working on and that they implemented for Below Zero, such as being able to have a number of pinned recipes that you can keep up in the corner of your screen to more easily keep track of, hey, here's a recipe that I want to look out for the ingredients for, or that, hey, remember to work on this particular item, etc. And, oh man, I wish that update had come out a couple months earlier than it did, because I already finished Subnautica 1 prior to it coming out, and I kind of wish I had all of these nice quality of life and performance improvements when I was doing so. But the game was still very, very much enjoyable either way. So, again, very, very good games. So, now on to some of the older stuff, or the new old stuff, such as, like I alluded to earlier, the Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection. It is coming out later this month, and I am very excited. I have never really played any of these games in any detail, but I've tried checking them out here and there. I've definitely watched some people play them the first couple games all the way through, and they really seem like a lot of fun. And another reason that I find these games interesting is because it feels like on the surface their stories, their plot lines are rather shallow, but meanwhile their gameplay is complex and takes a very long time to sort of master how that all works. The movement, the timing of your attacks and dodging enemies' attacks, especially since each enemy has, or most enemies have their own unique attack patterns. Sort of what combos you can build up with your various battle chips and how to deck out your folder to sort of set you up to have the right abilities for any specific area, especially things like some of the more advanced post-game areas that a couple of these games have. And in that sense, it almost kind of feels like a Pokemon game to me in that the stories, for the most part, are not super deep. They're not super emotional or serious. They feel a bit kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon. Does anyone still watch Saturday morning cartoons? Are cartoons only on Saturday morning anymore? I don't know. But the gameplay is really, really deep and has a very high skill ceiling. And of course, since both Pokemon and Mega Man Battle Network have a multiplayer function, I can imagine there is definitely the potential for a competitive scene. And of course, some kind of a meta that might go with it. And part of me wonders if that's why these games still seem to be mostly well regarded, and how they can endure despite perhaps shortcomings in, maybe their localization or their plots or stuff like that. Maybe the gameplay is just enjoyable enough once you get used to it that it's a game that you can keep coming back to. I don't know. Of course, each game definitely seems to make lots of tweaks and improvements and add quality of life as you go on for the most part. So I'll definitely be interested in seeing how that goes, starting from 1 and moving forward as I actually play it myself for the first time. And I have to wonder, does Mega Man Battle Network count as a card game? A la Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, because your battle chips, you have a folder of battle chips which you could liken to a deck of cards in a card-based playing game. So it kind of makes me wonder. I'd never really thought about that, but I think it might kind of count like one of those, in which case, yeah, that'll be interesting to get used to, because I also am generally, historically, not been a huge fan of card games. So we'll see. Maybe this has what it takes to hook me. Who knows? Another game that I'm really looking forward to is Metroid Prime Remastered. I just got my copy delivered almost a month late after the physical copies were first supposed to be available. But it's here. I have it, and I've been playing a little bit of it. I think I've got a couple hours into it now. I think I just got Morph Ball Bombs, maybe something a little... no, I just got the Varia suit, I think. It's taken me a long time. I'm still not totally used to the controls. I owned the Metroid Prime trilogy for Wii, and I played that a little bit, the first game, but man, I had not played Wii in a long time, and my arms got very, very tired very, very quickly trying to play those games. So I, again, did not make it very far. I think I probably got up to around that point, maybe a little bit farther, but it's been a number of years since then. And so, for the most part, this game definitely feels like a fresh, largely new experience to me. But yeah, getting used to the world, getting familiar with it, and then the controls is the biggest hurdle by far and away. It was with the original on, the Wii version wasn't the original, but it was the same way with the Wii version, and same with the Switch version. They have a bunch of different control options. All of them are weird. We've sort of got a twin stick style. That's the default, which is a new control scheme where you move around with the left stick and you look around with the right stick. That seems like it could be relatively intuitive to any sort of people who are used to modern shooters, but the game was definitely not originally designed around that control layout, and so some of the button mappings, from what I understand, are kind of weird when you get to doing the more advanced techniques. Then, of course, you have your pointer-style aiming, which is like the Wii controls. However, because the Switch does not use infrared and a motion bar and a sensor bar rather, like the Wii did, the accuracy is not as good as it was on the Wii, because the Switch Joy-Cons just use gyroscopes to determine your position, and etc. Then, of course, we have the classic game mode, which mimics the GameCube, the original GameCube control layout. And then there is hybrid, which is the GameCube control layout, but you can use gyro controls to aim precisely when you have your aim button, so your sort of targeting button held down. That's what I've been playing with primarily, and it feels okay, but I feel like this is a game where you might need to play through the entire game once before you actually feel like you have a constant intuitive sense of the controls. They're just hard to describe. It's hard to describe how weird they feel. Not necessarily in a bad way, but just in a sense that there is a lot going on and you have to do a lot, and so you're kind of juggling a lot of common buttons, and you have to switch back and forth between moving and aiming and locking on, and sometimes you need to move your view before you can lock on to an enemy to figure out to get it sort of on screen before you can lock onto it, and it's weird. So, but I am I don't know. I've been loving it so far. The graphics look gorgeous. The sound design's amazing. It plays really, really smooth, and the music is, of course, amazing, and I am a sucker for good music, as always. Speaking of good music, Ghost Trick is finally getting a proper HD port. I first played that game on my iPad back in high school, and that port basically got left in the dust alongside the original version of the Ace Attorney 1 through 3 HD trilogy, long before we got the 3DS versions or the new iOS and Steam and Switch versions. Yeah, they were a little bit jank, definitely had some weird issues to them. But yeah, while Ace Attorney HD trilogy did get kind of updated and revamped later on from its sort of jank beginnings, Ghost Trick did not. It just kind of languished and died, and I'm glad that I did get to experience it in some form, especially with native touch controls in some capacity. And it was such a fun game. I really, really want to go back and play it, and that's another game I'm considering playing for the GameCola YouTube channel at some point in the future. Amazing music, really great writing, hilarious and fun and engaging characters, made by the creator of the original Ace Attorney trilogy as well, Shu Takumi. This port specifically is getting a complete overhaul, sort of remastering of the original soundtrack by the composer of the great Ace Attorney, and that's super cool. My only complaint is that it is only available in digital form outside of Japan, which is a bummer, but I did go ahead and grab a physical collector's edition imported from Japan, pre-ordered, because it comes with a soundtrack CD, and I need those desperately because this game's soundtrack is amazing, and I listen to it very often because it's really good, and I can't wait to have CD quality audio of the full remastered soundtrack. Very excited for that. But of course, if you don't need those, or you're fine with just listening to the game because you're not a crazy nerd like I am, honestly, digital is probably the way to go. I think it's going to be on Nintendo Switch and PC. I would hope it's on other consoles, but I'm not positive about that at this time. So another classic game series that I've been playing lately is the Shin Megami Tensei and just some of the even earlier Megami Tensei games on NES and Super Nintendo. Man, the series has really come a long way. It is very different from these early games. In particular, any game from Shin Megami Tensei 3 onward has a very different gameplay formula to these previous games. These games are all sort of first-person view, grid-based dungeon crawlers. And I find that really interesting. If any of you are familiar with the Etrian Odyssey style of games or the Persona Q games, that's a lot of what they are like. It's really interesting because a lot of the mechanics are still the same. You still got the sort of core basics with recruiting demons by talking to them to invite them to join your party, and fusing them with other demons to create new, stronger, better demons, to not die in later areas, and just progressing your way through various different dungeons for the end goal of stopping some big bad evil and saving the world in some capacity. So I don't know, just a lot of fun. Not super narrative or story driven. Especially not the first game, the first games, Megami Tensei 1 and 2. Very, very light on the story. Barely any NPCs. Really, really heavily focused on the gameplay. Definitely a bit grindy, especially just because if you want to get strong demons, you really need to kind of go around trying and failing repeatedly to recruit new demons to your party, because that is an entirely RNG-based process, and it's weird. I could go on for a while about how I feel like there's some mechanics of the Shin Megami Tensei series that is just kind of bad game design in some sense, but that we've just kind of accepted it as a signature part of the series identity, and I guess it's fine. In particular, some of the early Megami Tensei games have enemies that can just permanently lower your level. Like, just, oh, hey, they hit you with this particular attack, and it just drops your level by 1. And they can sort of, to some extent, spam this ability, so you can find yourself losing 2 or 3 levels against these enemies when they show up if you're really, really unlucky. It's not an attack they use super common, but again, because it's all RNG based, you can kind of get screwed over. And then you just have to go and grind some more. And to me, that kind of feels like these games in general feel like they're very heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, but some of the mechanics that they adopt work a lot better when there is a human dungeon master controlling the action and who has the logic and foresight to kind of plan out events in the long term and change things up based on how things are currently going more dynamically, rather than just a basic enemy AI whose end goal is just defeat you is as semi-efficiently as possible. So, yeah, they're really fun games, especially if you like kind of first-person dungeon crawlers, but they definitely feel kind of antiquated these days. And one other thing that I've been doing that has actually made my experience oddly more enjoyable than you might expect is doing all of my own mapping for the most part. I have been using a piece of software. It's available on Steam. Costs like $15 or something, I think, maybe 25. It's called Grid Cartographer, and it's basically like a Dungeons and Dragons plus video game mapping tool. You can sort of draw all the layouts and the walls and the doors and where the NPCs are, add little notes for, hey, here's a treasure chest, here's what's in it. Add little terrain markers to say, hey, this is poison, or this is a pitfall, or this spins you around to a random direction, etc. Here's a save point. And that's been really, really useful because in these early Super Nintendo games, the maps really don't give you much information in game. They do have automatic mapping in game, but they only give you the general layout of the floors and where the entrances, exits, very specific buildings are, like shops, but they don't tell you what kind of shop it is. It just says, hey, here's a shop. Hey, here's a place where you can heal. Maybe. We don't always mark those. Or, hey, here's a place you can save. Here's a place you can fuse your demons. And it's much more convenient for me to have more detailed maps up alongside as I'm playing that I can reference to kind of keep better track of where I am and get a better, even intuitive sense of where everything is as I'm navigating these dungeons. And it feels oddly satisfying in its own way. I never grew up doing this in games that I played, but it just feels satisfying in addition to just the general actual, objective advantages of having a more detailed map. It kind of made me feel nostalgic for a thing that I have no nostalgia for, if that makes sense. So again, it's weird. It's odd. I haven't actually beaten any of these games, even though I've started and tried a bunch of them, but I hope to. I've been getting through them very gradually. Of course, I've also been replaying a lot of the classic Resident Evil games on PlayStation. Those are a lot of fun. I still have the best sense for the first game, but I've been trying to get through Resident Evil 2 as well, because I've never managed to beat that game, and I'd really like to try a sort of B route, the secondary playthrough, on a completed save file, which changes some things up, alters how the puzzles work, etc., and I've always wanted to see how that works, but I've never been able to before, so I've been kind of streaming it to a couple of my friends, and just kind of working through the game in bits and pieces, and they still hold up really well, although there's a couple little weird jank bits, like Resident Evil 2 in particular likes throwing occasional rooms at you where there are just way too many enemies. Like, you step into a room and there's 5 or 6 enemies just right there, and you need to have, maybe not split-second reflexes, but you need to react within 3 or 4 seconds, or you are going to be taking massive damage and potentially just getting stun-locked into dying and losing progress. And I don't like it very much. You kind of have to not go into certain areas until you get the shotgun, in which gives you some sort of area of effect damage. And even then, it can still be pretty overwhelming. So, anyway, lots of fun there. Speaking of other PS1 games I've been having a lot of fun with, Spyro! I recently grabbed the first 3 games on PS1, just discs off of eBay, and I've been going back and replaying those. I 120%ed Spyro 1 for the first time, and that's because you get 100% by beating all of the main levels, except there's one final level that only unlocks when you reach 100%. And then in that level, there's just basically a big giant bonus stage. There's not really any enemies. It's just a giant big level you can fly around in, mostly freely, and just collect a ton of gems, a ton of treasure, and that jumps your percentage all the way up from 100% to 120%. I did that for the very first time because when I was a kid, when we had the game originally, I think I completed every level except for the flight stages, because those were way too hard for me, and they're still kind of a difficulty spike even now. So I definitely had to look up a few guides for, hey, which way do I fly? How do I complete these objectives? But once I did, I was able to get the hang of it, and with mild difficulty, I was able to get through it, and it was such a fun experience. And now I'm finally able to experience Spyro 2 and 3, games which I've never actually played before. I do also own the Reignited trilogy on PS4 and on Steam, but I always kind of wanted to play the PS1 originals before I got too far into the HD remakes. And honestly, these games still hold up super well. Spyro 2 has a lot more voice acting than I expected, and it has a lot of little cutscenes when you enter each area and when you leave each area. It's really surprised me. Enemies, when you kill them, they don't drop gems anymore. They drop these sort of soul fragments, which, when you collect enough of those, it powers up sort of a secondary objective. And it's a little bit more exploratory. Whereas in Spyro 1, you could complete every single level the first time you visited it. Depending on what order you visit levels in Spyro 2, you may not be able to complete all of the objectives the first time around. You may need to unlock an ability later on and then come back to the level later to access an area you couldn't before, or to beat some kind of mini game that you had trouble with. It's really interesting. So many little secondary objectives. And after beating a level completely and coming back, there sometimes are even tertiary objectives for things called skill points, which I don't actually know what those do yet, or if they contribute towards your completion percentage or not. But that's really cool. Just kind of even more collectathon-y than Spyro 1. And of course, Spyro 3, I remember I got to play it a little bit at a friend's house when I was really young, but barely any memories of that game at all. So I'm looking forward to checking that out once I hopefully complete Spyro 2 all the way. So very, very, very fun. And I have been going back and checking out some of the Secret of games. That is Secret of Mana and the Secret of Evermore, which is another game by Square Enix, basically using the same game engine, but developed by a completely different team with a completely different premise. Man, Secret of Mana is not as fun of a game as I originally thought. A lot of the bosses are very spam happy with magic attacks that you just straight up can't avoid. And sort of the only way to combat that is to spam magic of your own. And there's not a ton of grinding, but if you want to survive a little longer and be able to cast more magic, it's definitely in your best interest to grind a bit. The combat is also a little bit rough. The hit detection is not super great. And sometimes, even when the hit detection works, you miss. Why? Why is missing attacks even a thing in a game where you can actually physically miss an enemy by not being lined up correctly with your sword swipe? Like they're already moving around. They're already flying around in weird patterns and jumping around and rolling around and just moving and being hard to hit in a physical capacity. So why would you make it so that even when you actually manage to land a hit, it can just miss? Ugh. But its graphics are fun, characters are charming, and the music is great. Interestingly, Secret of Evermore has very little soundtrack to speak of at all. It's mostly ambient noise and sort of sound effects, and that's really interesting because it's very immersive, and there's all these different various time periods. You're kind of traveling through a sort of fantasy world that's made up of a bunch of different time periods, but it's weird because each time period is its own geographic area, and I think they might kind of sort of know about each other's existence because you can convert between the different eras' currencies in each era. So I'm not really sure how that works, but it's weird. It's kind of quirky. It's got a lot of the same issues with combat. It's only a 2-player game this time rather than Secret of Mana, which is 3. And actually, I haven't verified that it's actually 2-player, but I know that by pressing select, you can switch between the boy and his dog. And I named my characters in that game Joel and Mike, respectively, for the boy and the dog. because the game makes a lot of like cheesy movie references, the boy in particular, and so although I'm not super familiar with the series, it makes me think of Mystery Science Theater 3000. So I feel like the reference is appropriate. But yeah, very very fun games as well. More fun games, continuing the trend. Can you tell that I like talking about games that I enjoy, at least in some capacity? Yeah, that's why I'm here. I hope you're still with me. Anyway, Dragon Quest VIII. I have been replaying that game as well with my family. That is, I sit down and kind of play the game, and some of my family members all sit around with me on the couch in our big family room, and they read off of our big Brady Games guidebook that we bought years and years ago, and it's just such a blast. And it's more incredible to me that a 100 plus hour JRPG of this age is still one that we are, as our whole family comes back to time and time again. It's not just me that replays this game every now and every couple of years. It's a couple of us, including my sisters, and it just shows how fun and charming that game is. We've just had so much fun going through that, and having it be sort of a collaborative family activity where one of us plays and the other people read the guidebook, tells you, oh, hey, if you're going through this area, be sure to check for this chest and this chest and this chest hidden off in these different areas. Or, oh, hey, you can craft a new piece of armor now, or you can go buy this ingredient that you need for this one set of alchemy here. It's still just an enduring pastime that we really enjoy. I've tried playing the 3DS remake that came out a number of years ago. I want to say 2018. It is a technical marvel that has a lot of neat quality of life features, but I can't really get into it because it just doesn't look good or sound good. The music is all MIDI in the 3DS version, which I kind of understand why they did that. The original Japanese version of Dragon Quest VIII was sort of a MIDI synthesized soundtrack. And on 3DS, I can understand why they do that, maybe to save space or something like that on the cartridge. I don't know for sure. But the American version of that game on PS2 had a fully orchestrated soundtrack recorded by the Tokyo Symphonic Orchestra. And it's so much better, and it sucks that this port can't have that. And the visuals are just a little bit degraded, in my opinion. The PS2 version had a really fancy dynamic lighting system, which the 3DS version, as far as I can tell, can't do, probably for performance reasons. It also runs at half the resolution because, of course, the 3DS's screen size is much smaller. And the menus are all black and white, and they're entirely text-based, even though, again, the US PS2 version had a dedicated graphical menu for things like the inventory, which was really, really cool and felt much nicer to navigate. My guess is, again, most likely this port was based purely off of the original Japanese version. I found out that the original Japanese version of the PS2 game actually had the sort of classic style menus from like the NES and SNES era, where you would press sort of a one menu button and it would bring up a list of options like talk, check, status, items, more, etc. And it really does feel like an early Dragon Quest game dating back to like the NES or something like that. And, you know, I always knew Dragon Quest was based off of, you know, tradition, and that they really kind of felt pride in that tradition. But at some point, I feel like you're kind of you're going kind of against quality of life and convenience in some respect. And I don't know. I'm glad that the American versions of a lot of these games streamlined them in that capacity. All right, and I think one of the last topics I wanted to talk about today was another game I've been playing. Can you imagine? Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, on my grandmother's old NES. I've gotten that hooked up and been playing that. It is surprisingly fun, but it is also very frustrating and very hard. It is a Nintendo hard game, as I think the 80s kids would say. However, I do have a flash cart for that system, and I've found that there's a really nice ROM hack. I believe it's called Zelda 2 Redux, that overhauls a lot of different aspects of the game mechanics, such as the experience system. And in particular, enemies that you could previously kind of farm for experience pretty easily, like the sort of skull-faced little bubble kind of enemies, now give you less experience to account for the fact that they're also been made easier to kill. But enemies that would previously just respawn endlessly and not give you experience, or even worse, if they hit you, might drain experience, now do drop experience and don't drain it anymore, because that's really frustrating. And some of the text has been kind of retranslated. The text boxes have been made larger so that the translation can be more accurate, to kind of help you, give you a better idea of where to go, etc. And something else that I've been discussing with people regarding ROM hacks is whether playing with a ROM hack harms the sort of creative integrity of games. If you shouldn't be playing with these ROM hacks if you want to get the original experience, because that's not how it was intended to be played. And I get that, and from a purist sense, I think that that's probably true. But in some cases, either we just didn't have the kind of game design sensibilities that we do today, or even in some extreme cases, games were deliberately designed to be frustrating to, for example, combat the market of video game rentals, so that if you wanted to get your game beaten, you didn't want it to be so easy that you could actually beat it on a single rental. No, you had to go back and return it and re-rent it again 3 or 4 times before you could get good enough, because the game would just kick your butt so much over and over, and you had to really invest a ton of time into getting it. But and I don't really have a problem with playing or using ROM hacks to try and circumvent frustrating game mechanics, or to just make a game feel more modern or more enjoyable to play in the modern day, especially since I have very limited time, and I might appreciate a game on a lot of its merits, knowing that it didn't originally play that way originally. I guess what I mean to say is I might still be able to enjoy a game even though I know I'm not playing exactly what was released 30, 40 years ago. And I don't know. It's up to you. It's your own personal preference. But I think a lot of these ROM hacks that the community makes are super duper impressive, especially just because of the amount of work and engineering that goes into actually being able to figure out, hey, here's what the game is doing under the hood. Here's how we can alter it and move stuff around and rearrange it to make it work this other slightly different way, or in some cases, completely different way. And especially with older games, that is a Herculean effort, and I have a lot of respect for it. And yeah, I think we might finally be done here. I think that's everything in my notes that I wanted to talk about, and I'm sure that as soon as this podcast is edited and goes live, I'll think of a bajillion other things that I wish I could have talked about, or, I wish I'd thought about that. But for now, I think this is pretty good, and I imagine that you're probably heard just about enough of my voice as you would want to hear for the rest of your life. So thank you for being here with me. I hope that this all turned out okay, and that you all enjoyed it to some degree. If you want to check us out, we have an actual internet website, which is GameCola.net. We've got our YouTube channel, which is either at GameCola or GC.net. That's the letter G, the letter C, the word dot, and the word net. And we are on, I believe, Twitter and Facebook as GameCola. And finally, we have our Discord, which is open to all. You're welcome to come in and chat with us. And by all means, if you would like me to expand upon any points that I've touched on here, I am sure I would be more than happy to do so. But hey, until next time, This has been the JamesCola Podcast, and we'll see you next month for a more regularly scheduled program. See you later, everybody. Well, as it turns out, talking to myself for a little over an hour, harder than I thought. Can everyone please come back now?